Your daughter is unteachable. That word hung in the air like a curse. Richard Wellington, billionaire, boardroom warrior, man who had stared down Wall Street predators without blinking, sat frozen, staring at the polished desk of Dr. Patricia Hawthorne, Beverly Hills' most expensive educational psychologist. He wanted to argue, to write another check, to summon another expert, but her voice cut through him like glass. I've tested thousands of children, she said flatly. Madison failed every single assessment. Numbers, reading, logic. She's at the very bottom. And out in the waiting room, little Madison had her ear pressed against the door, her stomach twisting. She'd heard the whispers before, teachers, nannies, even classmates, but never the word said so plainly. Unteachable. It sank into her like ice water. The drive home was suffocating. Madison stared at her lap, too afraid to look at her father. "Daddy, am I stupid?" she whispered. Richard's hands tightened on the wheel until his knuckles turned white. He could buy jets, skyscrapers, elections if he wanted. But here was his 8-year-old daughter asking if she was stupid. "No, sweetheart, you're not stupid," he said, forcing calm into his voice. "We just haven't found the right teacher yet." But inside, he felt more powerless than the day he'd been a broke teenager starting from scratch at a red light near Riverside Elementary. Madison's eyes locked on a skinny Latino boy teaching kids how to skip rocks across a puddle. He was patient, repeating the motion again and again, celebrating like crazy when the smallest girl made her rock skip 3 times. "Look, Daddy," she whispered, her face pressed to the window. "He's teaching them." Richard barely looked. To him, it was just another kid at recess. But to Madison, it was the first spark of hope she'd felt in months. The next morning, fate intervened. Their driver took a detour around construction and stopped by that same school. Madison's heart thumped in her chest. "I want to see something," she told James, the loyal chauffeur who had never once questioned her father's schedule. Before he could stop her, she bolted toward the playground in her polished academy uniform, standing out like a peacock among sparrows. And there under the oak tree was the boy, helping another kid with math that you're teaching him wrong. Madison blurted, the words sharper than she intended. The boy looked up, not offended, just curious. Warm brown eyes, a smile without a hint of mockery. "Hi, I'm Tommy. You're probably right. I'm only 7. How would you do it different?" Madison froze. At her private academy, admitting you didn't know was social suicide. But here was this kid, admitting ignorance without shame. "I'm terrible at math," she whispered. "Everyone says so." "Nobody's terrible at math," Tommy said, patting the grass beside him. "They just haven't found their way in yet." Something in his voice made her sit. And then he did something no tutor, no psychologist, no highly paid consultant had ever done. He made it real. 7 plus 5 wasn't numbers on a board, it was dolls on her shelf. 12 dolls, she shouted, grinning like she'd cracked a secret code. Tommy beamed. Exactly. That night Madison tried homework without tears for the first time in months. Richard noticed. His daughter, usually crumpling under equations, now whispered to herself about dolls and teams and pebbles. He leaned back in his chair, watching her quietly. Something had shifted. But what? 3 mornings in a row, Madison begged James for the scenic route. 3 mornings in a row she stole moments under the oak tree. Tommy's methods were strange but magical. Math as rhythm, multiplication as teams, fractions as sharing candy bars. She was learning, but more than that, she was believing again. On Friday, Richard followed them. The billionaire sat in his Mercedes, unseen, and watched his daughter, his perfectly dressed, fragile little girl, sitting in the dirt, laughing over math problems with a boy in worn sneakers. Bottle caps became counting tools. Pictures in the dirt turned into diagrams. And in 20 minutes, Madison grasped concepts her elite tutors hadn't managed in months. Richard whispered to himself, stunned, "Let me watch and learn." By Saturday, he was knocking on the door of a modest apartment where Maria Martinez, Tommy's mother, worked herself raw cleaning houses. Richard stepped into a space so bare it broke his heart. Patched up sofa, folding table, walls covered in Tommy's school certificates. Yet the boy stood there with dignity, extending his small hand. "Nice to meet you, sir." Madison's smart. She just needed numbers to feel like friends instead of enemies. In that cramped apartment, Richard saw it clearly. This wasn't charity. This was genius. Tommy had a gift, a way of unlocking minds that experts missed. What do you want to be when you grow up, son? Richard asked. Tommy's eyes burned with fire. A teacher. I want kids who feel stupid to know they're brilliant. Everyone just learns differently. And that's when Maria revealed the secret. Tommy himself had once been labeled broken. At 5, he couldn't read or count. The school wanted him in special ed forever. His father had fought the system, teaching him night after night with games and stories until one day it clicked. He died in a car crash coming home from another meeting, exhausted from construction by day and battles with the school board by night. Tommy wasn't just teaching Madison. He was carrying his father's mission. Richard felt the ground shift under him. A 7-year-old boy had stumbled onto a truth billions in education budgets had ignored. Maybe children weren't failing school. Maybe school was failing children. He offered Maria a radical proposal. Let Tommy work with Madison and other so-called hopeless kids. He'd fund an innovation center, study Tommy's methods, prove that no child was unteachable. Maria hesitated, protective, suspicious. My son's not an experiment, she warned. But Tommy tugged her sleeve. Mom, maybe this is what Dad wanted. Our fight, but with allies this time. Within weeks the center opened. Bright spaces, learning stations, laughter echoing off walls instead of tears. 10 children once labeled broken now found their languages. Marcus, the troublemaker, thrived when math was built with blocks. Sarah, dyslexic, read fluently when letters danced like characters in a story. And Madison, who once believed she was stupid, now became a peer tutor, helping others with patience she never had for herself. But revolutions don't go unnoticed. Dr. Morrison from the National Board stormed in with lawyers and inspectors, calling it dangerous, unregulated, a false hope. They demanded testing. And that's when Tommy, 7 years old, stood up. Test me, he challenged. Use the same exams that once said I was disabled. For hours he answered their questions, not with fear, but with clarity. When the results came back, the officials whispered in disbelief. 99th percentile. Gifted. No sign of disability. The same boy their system had tried to bury. And Tommy looked them in the eye and said words that cracked the room wide open. You weren't testing my intelligence. You were testing whether I thought like you. The news spread like wildfire. Parents across the country began asking questions. Testing companies panicked. Billionaires called Richard in fury. Do you realize you're threatening a $50 billion industry? But Richard only thought of Madison's face, once filled with despair, now lit with hope. He refused to back down. Then came the blow. Child Protective Services took Tommy. Anonymous complaints, accusations of exploitation. Everyone knew it wasn't coincidence. It was power striking back. Richard called a press conference. Cameras flashed as he declared, the real disability in our schools is their inability to see children's brilliance. A 7-year-old boy has done what experts failed to do for decades. Prove that every child can learn if we dare to teach differently. The next day, in a courtroom packed with reporters, Tommy testified. He read his old diagnosis aloud, words that once condemned him to failure, and then looked at the judge. That was me 2 years ago. Today, I'm teaching other kids. Either I'm a miracle or your tests were wrong. And one by one, the other children stood, voices trembling but proud. I'm not dumb. I just need to move when I learn. I'm not broken. I just read stories differently. The judge's gavel fell, declaring the program not only safe, but revolutionary. Months later, innovation centers spread across the nation. Madison thrived, no longer broken, but brilliant. Maria went back to school herself, determined to fight for policy change. And Tommy, still just a boy, was hailed as the youngest consultant in education history, shaping how teachers approached minds like his. But one evening, under the same oak tree where it all began, Madison leaned close and asked, "Do you think we really changed things?" Tommy watched the younger kids playing with numbers like toys and said softly, "Everyone's brilliant. We just have to stop teaching them wrong." The sun dipped low, painting the playground gold, and for a moment it felt like the future might really be different. Or maybe, some powerful people would fight to keep things the same. That's the question hanging in the air. What do you think? Is Tommy's revolution unstoppable, or will the system find a way to crush it? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because whether you believe it or not, this story isn't just about Madison or Tommy. It's about all of us and what we choose to call unteachable.